Sister Simone Campbell is part of the Order of Sisters of Social Service and the executive director of Network Lobby for Catholic Social Justice based in Washington, D.C. She's also the leader of what's better known as Nuns on the Bus, traveling across the U.S. on, you guessed it, a bus, to lobby for political and social justice. We are honored to have Sister Simone with us. Welcome. Let me just fix this for you a little. There we go. There. Okay.
Thank you. What an honor to be here. Being a vowed religious is the joy of my life. I treasure our contemplative practice that allows us to sink into the divine mystery alive in our world. This spiritual life, quite like the first Pentecost, impels us to take the gospel to where it would not be otherwise. In my life of ministry, I have done social work, I have practiced law, and now I engage in political ministry in the United States. I have had the amazing opportunity to live the charism of our Society of the Sisters of Social Service. It is fullness and it's joy. And my experience is as Pope Francis says in Evangelii Gaudium. He says, an authentic faith, which is never comfortable or completely private, always involves a deep desire to change the world, to transmit values, to leave this earth somehow better than we found it. I know that statement is true. Rooted in faith, I hunger to leave this earth somehow better. I work in a very challenging political time in our nation and our world. And some of you have already mentioned that to me, that you experience this too. I work to mend our nation's income and wealth disparity. These experiences nourish my prayer, and my prayer nourishes my service. I know that my sisters gathered here today share that awareness of the Spirit alive in our world. But as I turn my gaze from my place of service in Washington, D.C., to the reality around us here in Rome, I see our beloved church suffering because of the inability of leadership to see and accept the gifts of the Spirit that are being offered to our church in this very challenging time. So my faith has led me, and I hope all of us, to be more bold and consequently less comfortable as we work to embody the gospel within the context of our faith. The church in the United States and in other parts of the world continues to suffer from the results of the sexual abuse crisis. We suffer from the polarization woven into the church from the secular political chaos. The care for migrants and the marginalized has slipped off the radar of many of our ecclesiastical leaders. There is much lamentation about the lack of ordained clergy. Many leaders in our church are floundering. If the body of Christ is to be healed, our church leadership needs to turn their eyes to the gifts of the Spirit that are all around. But it does not appear that they are willing to do this unless we sisters speak up. We sisters need to help our clerical leadership to see with new eyes. In the gospel, we see Jesus time and again approaching the religious leaders of his day, poking, prodding them to greater insights. In the Acts of the Apostles, the early disciples engaged their religious leaders seeking change. The Acts of the Apostles makes it abundantly clear that from the beginning of our church, women were leaders in their communities, in their house churches of the 1st and 2nd century. Claiming this tradition for our time is essential for the future of our church. Acting as Jesus did, we come together to prod our leadership, to see the rightful place of women as recognized institutional leaders in the universal church. We come today grounded in our prayer, rooted in the Spirit, to call for our synodal sister representatives to at least have a vote, as do the representatives of the brothers. It's a small ask, but an important first step. Rooted in contemplative reflection, we listen to the whisper of the Spirit that leads us to speak up with a gospel message of inclusion of all of the faithful. But we don't speak for our own sake. We speak so that the gifts of the body of Christ might be fully realized. At the 2017 gathering of Voices of Faith, Cilla Elworthy from England spoke of her study of feminine intelligence. Her study has demonstrated when feminine intelligence is included in any system, including multinational corporations, small business, and church settings. When this feminine intelligence is included, the whole system flourishes. Cilla has identified 5 characteristics that would be of tremendous benefit to the church structure. Her studies have revealed that this feminine intelligence includes inclusivity, listening, interconnection, compassion, which she says is empathy that leads to action, and regeneration. In this time of the abuse crisis, church financial scandals, and current reported infighting and intrigue in the Curia, it would be a breath of fresh air to include this feminine intelligence, at least at the Synod. And how appropriate to do this for the first time at the Synod on the Amazon region. In Washington, D.C., where I live, I know the Sisters of Notre Dame, whose sister Dorothy Stang was murdered for her effort to protect the Amazon from exploitation and degradation. Sister Dorothy gave her life for the people and for the land. We sisters have a responsibility to lift up her voice and make her presence felt. How can our beloved institution turn their backs on the voices of our sisters who live with the people of this threatened region? How can our sisters not have at least one vote at the Synod? And my sisters, how can we not speak up for the most marginalized people and for our wounded earth? The time is now. Some might want us to believe that our vow of obedience would keep us from speaking up. However, we know that from our study of obedience in the Benedictine tradition that my community follows, that obedience is to listen with the ears of our heart and then act on what we hear. This listening leads me today to say to you, silence is not an option. The experience of our sisters and our brothers whom we serve need to have us speak of our lived experience. We are the witnesses on this new Pentecost for our people and our earth. The Spirit calls us to speak against all forms of exploitation, whether in society or in the church. So, let us speak clearly today of the gifts of the Spirit that we have been given. Let us lift up the insights and wisdom that we have discovered through prayer and through encounter. Let us open ourselves to this Pentecost moment. We are sent out of this room to speak of the need of our church to accept our gifts as part of the body of Christ. The time is now. The time is now to be faithful and obedient to the Spirit of God, and the memory of our martyrs demands it. This is the authentic demand of our faith. This is our task today.